Well, thank you, John. Good evening to everybody. It really warms my heart to see all of you here tonight. I really mean that. As John said, I think of you as family, the members of the Word on Fire Institute, even though we're thousands of miles away from each other. It's just marvelous to think that, a sermon I give or a podcast or whatever comes all the way over here and moves into your minds and hearts. And the forming a family, forming a community of the Word on Fire members, that's what it's all about. Honest to God, one of the great highlights is seeing and meeting all of you, because that's the means by which we're going to carry the Word on Fire ethos, I hope, into this country. Hey, I just want to share with you a couple of simple ideas. I know you've all been following me over the years, so maybe this is not very new to you, but I worked up a little presentation here on some of the principles that undergird my work and inform the work that I do. And that's really Word on Fire principles I hope you would also take in as you do your evangelizing work. That's the purpose of the Word on Fire Institute, is to form an army of on-the-ground evangelists who can move, as Vatican II envisioned, into the various expressions of the secular culture. So anyway, I want to share with you just a few of these principles briefly, and then I want Andrew will speak, who's one of our fellows at the Word on Fire Institute. Here's the first principle that undergirds my work. I'm going to name each one, by the way, for a figure from the tradition. The first one is the Irenaeus principle. So maybe if you've been following me, you know that St. Irenaeus is a theological hero of mine. I think in many ways, along with Origen and Augustine, the greatest of the church fathers. Irenaeus always said that he was taught by Polycarp, who was taught by John. And so by a couple of quick steps, he goes right back to the apostolic age and claims that authority. But the great adage that I quote probably ad nauseum is Gloria Dei Homo Vivens from Irenaeus. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. Now, why is it important? Because I think beginning for all kinds of reasons in early modernity, but very much enduring to our time, is the assumption, is the presumption that somehow God and we are rivals. God's a threat to our flourishing. For God to get the glory, I have to get less glory. Well, see, Irenaeus saw through that long ago. No, the glory of God is when we are fully alive. And the metaphysical reason for that is that God is not a being competing with us on the same sort of playing field. God is the sheer act of to be itself, informs and undergirds and makes real finite reality. Therefore, he's not competing with us. His proximity enhances our humanity. See, I love that adage because it's the ground of all Christian humanism. A human being fully alive, homo vivens, that's politics and art and science and literature and friendship and all the things that make life wonderful. That's what God wants for us. I've often shared, you probably heard the image of the burning bush, comes to mind. As God comes close, the bush is on fire, but not consumed. In other words, it's more radiant, more beautiful, and it's not consumed by God's proximity. Contrast that, by the way, with the Greek and Roman gods, who always come barreling into the world. Something has to give or be incinerated as the gods enter. On the contrary with the God of the Bible, whose proximity makes us more alive. That's a basic Word on Fire principle for me. We have to proclaim to our culture that has, believe me, taken in this prejudice that God's a threat to our flourishing. We have to keep announcing, no, the more God invades the totality of our life, personally and societally, the more alive we are. So that's the first principle. Second one, and again, you've probably heard me talk about it a lot, is the Augustine principle. Lord, you have made us for yourself, therefore our heart is restless until it rests in thee. Page 1 of the Confessions of Augustine. It's the greatest statement in the entire tradition of Catholic or Christian anthropology. How Christians understand the human being. That's the best statement of it. Lord, you've made us for yourself. Therefore, and then Augustine doesn't say our hearts in his Latin, but cor nostrum, he says, our hearts. So what he's saying is we all have this in common. No matter our background, no matter who you are, no matter how you've been shaped and formed, everybody has this restless heart. I've taken it as fundamental to all my work in evangelization. Is I just go forth assuming everybody's hungry for God. Now, as Augustine well knew, it takes strange form very often. So the restless heart hooks onto something less than God. And for my money, that's the best single diagnosis of what goes wrong with human beings. Now, we can analyze it psychologically and economically and politically, but at the bottom level, that's what goes wrong with all of us sinners, is we take the infinite desire for God and we hook it onto something less than God. And it makes us frustrated first and then addicted. And you see that throughout the Bible, story after story. Something less than God becomes the focus of the deepest longing of the heart. Well, then I become addicted to it because I have to get more and more and more of it. It never satisfies me. What the classical spiritual writers called concupiscence is very close to what we call today addiction. See, my assumption is almost everybody you talk to in the world today is addicted to something because their hungry hearts, their restless hearts are not properly directed. That's what my work is about in many ways, is directing the restless heart the right way. That's my hope for everyone involved in Word on Fire. It actually constitutes one of the basic arguments for God's existence, doesn't it? You know, if we have a desire that's truly natural to us, that desire orders us towards something real. Right? So our hunger for food is an indication there really is food that will satisfy it. And our thirst, it really is an indication that there's something out there to satisfy it. So in a similar way, we all have a hunger and thirst for the infinite. It's a sign that there really is an infinite fulfillment of that desire. So the Augustinian principle, when people are berating me on social media, so whenever you go on social media, people will make comments, right? And they typically don't comment by saying, "My bishop, that was a wonderful observation. Thank you so much. It's changed my life." You rarely hear that. You hear someone attack it. But the key, I think, to any good evangelist is to know behind that question, there's somebody with a restless heart. And look, they're coming on a website dedicated to religious themes. So, there's something drawing them, and it's the Augustinian. Third principle I'm naming for John of Damascus. John Damascene, maybe not a household name, but this figure he bridges the 7th into the 8th century. John Damascene took a lead role in the iconoclast controversy of that time. It was a pivotal moment in the history of the church. There were those who were saying, for all kinds of reasons, some going back to the Old Testament, some coming from Islam, which was emerging right at that time, that we shouldn't make images for God. Right? It's an insult to God. It's idolatrous. Don't make graven images. And so the iconoclasts, the breakers of icons, well, they were countered by the iconophiles, those who love icons. And their leading articulate spokesman was John of Damascus. Now, I think he's so important because if he had lost that battle, if the iconoclasts had won, there'd be no Notre Dame or Chartres Cathedral, there'd be no Sainte-Chapelle, there'd be no Sistine Chapel ceiling. The whole history of Christian art and iconography and the visual representation of the faith wouldn't have happened. Of course, his central argument is really interesting, John of Damascus. It was, well, look, God made an icon of himself. So the incarnational sensibility, and that's Paul's own language, that Christ is the icon of the invisible God. And that's the key, isn't it? So a visible icon, the humanity of Jesus, becomes the means by which we have access to the invisible God. And that's how one prays with an icon. By extension, that's how one can use the visible, the visual, the artistic, the sensual, to have access to the invisible things of God. That, to me, is a fundamentally important principle, and you know that from my work. I believe in preaching, I believe in the power of the word, but I think you evangelize through beauty. So I've taken Balthasar as a key influence. Balthasar, who reversed the transcendentals. Instead of going from the true to the good, the beautiful, he begins with the beautiful. In fact, Balthasar thought that the beautiful was often the kind of the poor stepchild of the transcendentals. That there's a lot of focus on the true and the good in our tradition. Indeed, there is. And the beautiful is more of an afterthought. And he said, no. In fact, it's the first of the transcendentals. Because it's the beautiful that first gets your attention. It's the splendor of something that makes us, we look and we take it in. And then once we take it in, well, then the mind engages the truth of it and the will engages the goodness of it. But beauty comes first. Think with our child in the back there. Balthasar said that the door that opens someone to all of being is the smile of his mother. It's a lovely idea that the child and the mother smiling, it's the beauty of her smile that opens the child to the good and the true in all of their capaciousness. So finally, it's that little door opened by the beautiful. Now, maybe if you followed me, trace that all the way back to Plato's Symposium, come up through Dante, go all the way to James Joyce, we find that theme over and over again of the particular beautiful that opens us to the sea of the beautiful itself. Well, I mean, I take that as axiomatic in my work, that beauty is a route of access to evangelization. That's why we did the Word on Fire Bible the way we did. I mean, you could have a Bible, the text of it, with all kinds of rich commentary. We have that. But I wanted that Bible to be beautiful, that you sit down and you want to contemplate that Bible. Like, what was it these last several days I've told my friends here, I think it's the best view I've ever had from a hotel room ever in my life. It's right across the river, and I open the drapes in the morning. There's the entire complex of the Houses of Parliament. Puget, of course, deeply Catholic architecture. Very ecclesiastical looking building, isn't it? But what is it? I'll spend an hour just gazing at it. It's because the beautiful is the first of the transcendentals. It's what grabs our attention. I would like everyone in this room, if you want to be an evangelist, to evangelize through beauty. How important the beauty of this culture is, So that's the John of Damascus principle. It's anti-Kantian. So, Immanuel Kant, the greatest of the modern philosophers. But Kant's influence, it's enormous because he reduced religion to ethics. This came up in a conversation last night that I had. When you get push comes to shove, what religion's all about, Kant said, is ethics. So liturgy and sacraments and all that is reducible to ethics, making us good persons. Well, that's all over the place today, isn't it? It all comes down to social justice. Well, yeah, we love the commitment to social justice, but it doesn't all come down to social justice. That's a reductionism that we ought to avoid because the beautiful opens up all these other horizons. Okay, so the Irenaeus principle, the Augustine principle, the John of Damascus principle, and then fourthly is the Thomas Aquinas principle. So here's my intellectual hero, the person who changed my life when I was a kid and set me on a path I'd never really left. Faith and reason, obviously, Thomas is the great avatar of the faith and reason relationship, that we avoid that bifurcation. We don't say, by faith alone, we don't drive a wedge between faith and reason, but we use our minds. We're a smart religion. And I keep banging pulpits and podiums all over the world. I'll bang this one too. To make that point, because we've so suffered from it, everybody. I can't really speak for here, I speak my own country, but the dumbing down of our faith was a pastoral disaster. Not just intellectual disaster, it was a pastoral disaster. Because survey after survey will show that's why young people have disaffiliated. Again and again they'll say, because religion just seems stupid, or it doesn't make sense, I don't believe the doctrines. Science refutes religion. And so, in many ways, we did this to ourselves when we threw away many of our intellectual weapons. When I was coming of age, apologetics was a bad thing. It meant you were defensive, you were anti-ecumenical, you weren't respectful of other points of view, you were a cramped rationalist. No, but we need apologetics all the time, from Irenaeus and Origen all the way through C.S. Lewis. We've had this marvelously apologetic tradition The fact that we threw away those weapons was one reason why the new atheists, many of whom were started right here, right? Why many of the new atheists had such an impact. And God bless us, they're terrible. They're nothing new about them. They're just rehearsing these old tired arguments from the 19th century and the existentialists and all that. But that we were so ill-equipped to deal with those, frankly, superficial objections to religion. That's a commentary, a very negative commentary on the fact that we had robbed ourselves of our own intellectual tradition, I think. You got the sense I feel strongly about this. Relatedly, man, how we have underestimated what especially young people are capable of. Something I'll tell you, I'm proud of this. When I started doing my work with the videos, that sort of thing years ago, many people said to me, "Oh gosh, Father, this is way over people's heads. You can't sit from a bookcase and with your Roman collar on and talk about Thomas Aquinas. I mean, come on, no one's going to listen to that." Well, by God, they have listened. We have 125 million views on YouTube, and I'm darn proud of that. And I throw it back in the faces of my early critics who felt that, no, people aren't capable. Nonsense. Of course they're capable of it. And I loved it. I never designed any of those videos for high school kids, or you call them secondary students here, right? Secondary school. But I was delighted when teachers came to me and said, "Oh yeah, I'm using them in my classroom." Good. Because my generation, believe me, we all thought, oh gosh, the kids can't handle anything. They're handling advanced physics in high school. They're handling advanced chemistry, advanced literature. They're reading Shakespeare. Why couldn't they handle something more advanced in religion? So the Aquinas principle says in our evangelizing, we got to stop dumbing it down. We got to stop underestimating what people are capable of, and we've got to feed them serious stuff. I told this story the other day. So I mentioned the new atheist, Christopher Hitchens. I kind of a guilty pleasure, I suppose, listening to Hitchens because I sort of liked his style, and his moxie. But I was on a radio program, this many years ago, 20 years ago. It was a Canadian program, and they were interviewing me about Hitchens because he was all the rage at the time, and all his objections. And so I answered them for an hour, But at the end, the fellow said to me, "Well, Father, would you at least admit this, that Hitchens got you Catholics thinking about these things for the first time?" I did that, and I said, Origen, Irenaeus, Augustine, Chrysostom, Jerome, Anselm, Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, John Henry Newman, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis. I said, trust me when I tell you, we did not need Christopher Hitchens to get us thinking about these things for the first time, But look, I don't entirely blame him because we did that to ourselves. We dumbed down the operation, and we got to stop that. Okay, enough with that. So there's the Aquinas principle. Last one, and then I'll stop. Last one I'm going to call the Fulton Sheen principle. I know he's not as well known here. I spoke the other day at St. Patrick's in Soho, and that's where Sheen, of course, the great American evangelist, first one to really use radio and television in a powerful way. He used to go there. He'd come to England on vacations or when he was studying, and he lived at St. Patrick's and preached there. So a strong association. He loved London, by the way. In fact, Chesterton wrote the preface to Sheen's first book. His doctoral paper he turned into a book, and he got Chesterton somehow to write the preface for it. Anyway, Fulton Sheen, who taught philosophy and religion and apologetics for about 20-some years at Catholic University in Washington. It's my alma mater. And then when he was probably in his, late 30s or 40s, he gets into radio first, did the Catholic Hour for many years, and then famously gets on television in the 1950s, where he outperformed the biggest entertainers of the time, Frank Sinatra, Jackie Gleason, and Milton Berle. He was topping the top entertainers of the time. The reason I invoke him is Sheen faced a lot of the same thing that I faced early on, namely people saying to him, look, Bishop, you can't do anything serious on radio or television. It's going to be superficial by its very nature, and I don't bother. It's just going to dumb it down. Well, Sheen, calling upon his own very rich intellectual formation, he had the agrégé, advanced doctorate from Louvain, calling upon all of that and showing great rhetorical skill and understanding the culture very well, was indeed able to proclaim the faith in such a way that he galvanized millions of people across the English-speaking world. But somehow it's funny to me still. I don't entirely understand it. After Sheen, we dropped the ball, seems to me. After Sheen, we Catholics just became terrible at the use of the media. And that's what I started to see in the 1990s was we have to follow Sheen. We have to use this tool at a time of radical disaffiliation. We've been given in God's providence a tool to reach the disaffiliated. And that's what inspired me to use, all the range now of the new media. And so I think you can do it in a way that's appealing to a more general audience and yet substantive and reflective of the richness of the tradition. So I invoke Sheen. So if you're interested in the Word on Fire ethos or sensibility, I'd put it in those five: Irenaeus, Augustine, John of Damascus, Thomas Aquinas, and Fulton Sheen. That's what's animated me, and hope it might animate.
Peace be with you. Happy New Year's Day in the secular sense, but also the feast of Mary, the Mother of God, on this January 1st. There are three words from our gospel. It's from Luke. I've always loved these three words I want to reflect on. The first one is haste. The second one is astonished. The third one is treasured. Haste, astonished, and treasured. Luke tells us the shepherds went in haste to Bethlehem and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. Haste. The angels told them something. This message came from another world, from on high. And they were given a task. They were sent on mission. And by God, they went. They moved. Remember, of course, in the same gospel, we hear that Mary, after the Annunciation, went in haste, same word, to visit her cousin Elizabeth. She'd been given a message from a higher world. She'd been given a sense of mission, and then she moved. Think of the three wise men. That's in Matthew's gospel. They see the star, and then despite all the difficulties, despite all the obstacles, they moved. The Bible is a book of missions. Nobody in the Bible, there's no exception, nobody in the Bible is ever given an experience of God without being concomitantly and consequently sent. If God appears, God reveals something, the higher world breaks through, the proper response is not, let me just stay here and look at that. No, the proper response is, now go. Because you're meant to be a bearer of the beauty of that manifestation to others. That's the basic biblical intuition. Hans Urs von Balthasar, the great 20th century theologian, said that beauty has that quality. If you see something beautiful, you hear something beautiful, a symphony or whatever, it has a way of, it seizes you and then it sends you. As an apostle, apostellein means to send. It sends you out on a mission to tell others about it. It's true, isn't it? The truly beautiful, we don't just sit alone with it. No, we allow it to act, as it were, through us, and we become its messengers to the wider world. This is true now of all of us baptized people. We've all been given a mission. John Henry Newman said, we've all been made for a definite purpose. We've all been given a particular task. And I want everybody listening to me right now to think about that. You're not just dumbly here or a result of a cosmic accident. No, you've been willed into existence by God. Why did he create you? Because he's got a mission for you. Hey, it might not be what the world thinks is important. Who cares? Who cares? That's, by the way, a great biblical theme is people get distracted by, the world thinks this is so important. Who cares? It means nothing. What does God think is important for you? What's your mission from God? It might be the quietest thing. Think now of the little flower, right? And the little way. It's little in the eyes of the world, but great in the eyes of God. Now, here's the point. Once you understand what that is, Move. Act. Don't procrastinate. Don't fall asleep. Don't dawdle around. Move. Go in haste. Don't waste time. Life is short and the mission is clear. Move in haste, everybody. Be about the work the Lord has given you to do. Okay? Here's the second word I love from this passage. Astonished. It says, all those who heard the shepherd's story of the angels were astonished by it. You know, it's true, and the Bible says this, that God is found in ordinary things, ordinary, people and places and events. That's true. God speaks through nature. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The natural things that happen to us in this life, we say God speaks through those. True enough. But at the heart of biblical religion is something beyond that. See, because that can be true of any religion or any mysticism or any religious philosophy, right? We could all agree, that ultimate reality kind of speaks to us through the things of this world. Sure. But there's more to biblical religion than that. Because at the heart of the Bible is this claim that God has broken through into the natural order. God has disclosed something of himself to us that we would not normally know. The way that when you come to know a person, you can learn a lot about the person just by, watching and maybe studying a little bit and looking that person up on, Wikipedia or Google or something. But finally, that person has to open her heart to you and reveal something that you would never have known otherwise. See, that's the revelation that has to be at the heart of any really deep human relationship. Now, a fortiori, to the nth degree, this is true of our relationship to God. Yes, we can know certain things about God through the natural order and through history. But finally, God speaks himself to us. And you know what that's like, everybody? That's astonishing. I know sunsets are beautiful and they speak of God. I get it. Sure, true. But when God speaks his own mind and heart in a way that we would never have guessed otherwise, that's astonishing. When he reveals his will and purpose to us in this personal way that we would never otherwise have known, the proper response is amazement and astonishment. I've always loved this in G.K. Chesterton. He made a contrast between depictions of the Buddha, where the Buddha has his eyes closed in meditation. And then, says Chesterton, the statues on the outside of Chartres Cathedral. Those figures, and it's true, look them up on the web if you want to check it. Those figures aren't meditating with eyes closed. No, they have their eyes wide open. Why? Because they're looking at something that came to them from the outside. Something they found so surprising and astonishing that it changed them forever and sent them on mission. That's the right, seems to me, ordinary response to the revelation of God. Third word. So haste, astonishment. Third word is treasured. Listen, Mary, and it's her great feast day today, Mary, the Mother of God. Mary treasured these things and reflected on them in her heart. What things? These astonishing things. Think of the angel appearing to Mary. How astounding that was. And it caused her to go in haste to visit her cousin. Think how astonished she must have been when she heard the message from these shepherds about their angelic encounter. Think how shocked she must have been by the visit of the wise men, these magi coming from the long, far way to to worship this new king. I mean, how would she have understood that? Well, the marvelous thing is that she treasured them in her heart and reflected upon them. You know, if you read Shakespeare, I'm a big Shakespeare fan. I don't know how many versions of Hamlet I've seen in the course of my life. I've seen several live, and then I've watched many others on film. Why would you do that? You think, well, look, didn't you read it once and you got it? That's Hamlet. And, hey, I saw one production of it. Wouldn't that be sufficient? Well, yeah, it would be for some tawdry little nothing, play. You're not going to go see the 6th grade play over and over and over again, right? But Hamlet or Macbeth or King Lear, there's such richness in it that you could never take it in one viewing. No, you want to go back again and again. And in fact, you want to see different actors do it because the different actors bring out different aspects of the character. You want to read it again and again as you move through your own life. It's true, isn't it? As you move through your own life, your reading of great works of art changes because you're maturing in different ways and you're able to see and take in things. Heck, I first read Romeo and Juliet when I was 14. We read it in freshman English class at Fenwick High School. And the teacher just had various ones of us, read some of the parts. I didn't understand any of it. I maybe got 10% of it. Okay, I was 14. I've read it and watched it in the course of my life, savoring it. Or think of Beethoven's symphonies, which I love, especially the 9th. I first heard it, I probably was a teenager when I first heard it. I was astonished by it. That's true. I was from the beginning. I remember when I first heard the Ode to Joy, in the 4th movement, and I knew that hymn. I mean, we call it the Ode to Joy, or the Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. There's that hymn from church. I didn't realize it came from Beethoven's 9th Symphony. But it's so fascinating to me that I kept going back to it again and again. I would buy different versions of it, listen to different orchestras and conductors. One of the highlights of my life, I really mean this, was years ago when I was a student in Europe. I went to Vienna one time and was able to get in. It was just a standing room only ticket. I was just a young guy, didn't have much money. And standing in the back of this great symphony hall in Vienna, and it was the Vienna Philharmonic. And they were playing Beethoven's 9th Symphony. It was one of the great moments of my life to be there in this, sort of capital of music. My point here, everybody, I hope you're not finding it too tiresome, is really great works of art, really great and beautiful things. We don't just say, oh yeah, it's great, terrific, and then move on. No. After that original astonishment, now we treasure. We savor, we mull over, we draw out the implications, we see different aspects. John Henry Newman said that Mary, treasuring the great mysteries of Christmas in her heart, becomes the patroness of all theology. It's a marvelous insight. I spent a lot of my life as a theology teacher and writer. That's what theology is, the church up and down the ages, treasuring and mulling over and reflecting upon the astonishing events of salvation. So, haste, move. If God has broken into your life in some decisive way, you've been given your mission, don't worry about what the world says. Don't worry about that. Don't get hung up on your own limitations. Move, act, go. When God manifests himself, the right response is astonishment. And then savor, treasure, reflect upon these astonishing things in your heart. I think in all these ways, everybody, since opposition to abortion, as we've just showed, is not a conviction born of dogma, but rather of moral reasoning, it's utterly incoherent to claim that one can hold to the position privately but not defend it publicly. On numerous occasions throughout his public career, President Biden has asserted his personal belief as a Catholic that human life begins at conception and that therefore abortion is morally wrong. Now, he's always been quick to add he's unwilling to use the law to impose this personal conviction on anyone else. He presumably feels that since this understanding of human life is a function of uniquely Catholic doctrine or dogma, it would be as objectionable to require everyone to accept it as it would to require all Americans to assent to the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception or to the Articles of the Nicene Creed. But everybody, this is so much nonsense. Opposition to abortion is not a matter of doctrine in the strict sense of the term, but rather a conclusion drawn from moral reasoning and from the findings of objective science. It's an indisputable fact that human life, which is to say a living human being with a distinctive genetic structure and identity, comes into existence at the moment of conception. It's furthermore a fundamental axiom of ethics that innocent human life ought never to be attacked. These insights and principles are the foundation of an argument against abortion that can and should be made in the public forum. They are decidedly not a matter of dogma peculiar to Catholicism. Now, I fully understand that people might disagree with the line of reasoning I propose. Fine. Let's argue the matter in the public forum and see which of us can garner majority support. But please don't tell me that I'm imposing a dogma on you. While I'm at it, may I say, I am mightily tired of the way the president and his allies use the term impose. Time and again, they say some version of, I'm unwilling to impose my beliefs on others. Now that we've established that opposition to abortion is not a matter of sectarian doctrine, can we also admit that any law, by its very nature, imposes on others? If a majority of federal representatives formulate a piece of legislation to set the speed limit at 65, if the executive agrees with this determination, a law would go into effect imposing this viewpoint on the entire society. The same goes for tax codes, antitrust regulations, minimum wage requirements, civil rights statutes, etc., etc. Laws don't suggest. They impose. That's their nature. And behind every truly just law, there's some moral principle. Preserving life, establishing greater justice, protecting the poor, fostering the common good, etc. So if you were to ask me whether I was working to impose on the entire society a law that would protect the rights of the unborn, I would say, yes. And then I would add, and what's your point? And finally, can we please put pay to the silly position first articulated by Governor Mario Cuomo 35 years ago, and then tiresomely repeated by far too many Catholic politicians ever since, that, quote, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but publicly I support it, close quote. Again, one might make such a distinction in regard to a strictly doctrinal matter, arguing, for instance, I personally believe it's indispensable to attend Mass every Sunday, but I would never dream of sponsoring legislation to that effect. Fine. However, since opposition to abortion, as we've just showed, is not a conviction born of dogma, but rather of moral reasoning, it's utterly incoherent to claim that one can hold to the position privately but not defend it publicly. That would be precisely analogous to someone in the 19th century saying that though he personally finds slavery abhorrent, he'll do nothing to eliminate it or even to stop its spread. It would also be precisely analogous to someone in the mid-20th century saying that, though his personal conviction is that Jim Crow laws are morally repugnant, he will fight publicly to keep them in place. In light of this, can you see why so many Catholics, including your humble scribe here, find the president's statements and actions in regard to abortion so repellent? He claims he objects to abortion, that he considers it morally wrong, and yet, time and again, in the most straightforward, even strenuous manner, he strives by word and deed to make it more available, more acceptable, more legally defended. In the 19th century, the viscerally anti-slavery Abraham Lincoln did not pursue the extreme anti-slavery policy advocated by the abolitionists. Rather, he took a more moderate position, endeavoring to hem slavery in, to limit its spread in the hopes that he was setting it on the course for extinction. This was, for the 16th president, a matter of prudential political judgment. Now, if our current president, convinced as he claims to be that abortion is wrong, were to take steps in the direction of at least curtailing the practice, or if he could have found positive words to say about the Dobbs decision that at least gives individual states the right to restrict abortion, I might see him then in the mold of Lincoln. But instead, he presses forward, advocating the most radical pro-abortion policy imaginable, seeking to codify into law the Roe v. Wade and Casey decisions that essentially made abortion, up to the moment of birth, a matter of legal impunity in our country. Now, I believe this is precisely why Pope Francis recently referred to the president's position on abortion as incoherent. President Biden speaks often of his Catholic faith, attends Mass regularly, and prays the Rosary. I applaud him for all that. I have no reason whatsoever to doubt the sincerity of his Catholicism. But I am sorry to say that in regard to the most pressing moral issue of our time, he stands athwart both the teaching of the Church and right reason. Maybe we don't have to be in this stance of kind of mutual suspicion and animosity, but someone from the tech world, the science world, can ask a religious person, tell me about your thought world. That can produce a wonderful result. And I think it did in this case. I think it was a really good conversation.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the senior publishing director here at Word on Fire. Bishop Barron has recently had two major discussions with very interesting people, over 1 million views combined. One of them was with Lex Friedman, the professor of robotics and artificial intelligence at MIT, also a very popular podcaster. The second one was with Shia LaBeouf, the Hollywood movie star who has journeyed to the Catholic Church. So what did Bishop Barron think of these two discussions, and what lessons can Catholics take away from them? That's what we'll be talking about today on the podcast. But before we get there, Bishop, I want to welcome you. It's good to see you.
Hey, Brandon, good to see you. And now for the second time from Minnesota, huh? We're a little physically closer than we were in the Santa Barbara days.
Yeah, give us an update on how the new diocese is going. What's been happening there?
Well, a lot. I've been here now for a month as bishop, and the ship is still floating, so that's a good sign, I suppose. I've been just going to a lot of places. So one of my priorities is just to get around to parishes and to see as many people. I think I've been to 9 parishes now, and I've been to one of our high schools. I was at St. Mary's University last week. So that's a high priority, just getting around. Meeting with our consultors, the College of Consultors tomorrow, as well as the Presbyteral Council. I'm just back from Duluth. I was up in Duluth. Never been there before. It's a lovely city, right on the shores of Lake Superior. I was there for the provincial meeting. So all the bishops of Minnesota and the 2 Dakotas get together every summer. So we had 3 days of meetings, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but a highlight for me was the trip to Hibbing, Minnesota, which is the hometown of Bob Dylan, one of my heroes. So on the afternoon of the second day, we all got in a bus, and they kind of indulged me, I think. It was because I wanted to go, but everyone came along, and we went out to Hibbing and saw all the Bob Dylan sites, and it was an interesting thing. So my priority's been just kind of getting around and seeing as many of my people and priests as I can.
You were asking for some prayers because in a couple days you have to take a driver's license test there in Minnesota.
Yeah. I shouldn't say this, but the DMV just makes me nervous, and when you come from out of state, it's true in California too. You come from out of state, you got to do a written driver's exam. Well, they're not easy. I remember the California one was hard, and you do practice tests online. I've been doing them for the past couple of weeks. They're not easy. So say a prayer that I get through the DMV exam on Thursday.
Okay, I wanted to recap these two really interesting discussions you've had, one with Lex Friedman, one with Shia LaBeouf. Let's start with Lex Friedman. So you did this several months ago. I think you and Lex met somewhere in California, just the two of you, filmed this long hour-and-a-half discussion. At the time of this recording, it has 415,000 views, over 4,500 comments on YouTube. Lex has spoken to many cultural influencers, people like Joe Rogan, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Sam Harris, and his audience, I think what most appeals to you, his audience includes millions of young, unaffiliated men and women. This was a tremendous outreach to the nuns. He started off the interview by asking you, what is God? Did you know at that moment that this was going to be a good discussion?
Yeah, I liked him a lot. I'd seen a few of his things, interviews. I met him that day. It was in LA. I remember going from the cathedral over into like the Hollywood area, and we met at a place there, and he just very simply set up a little, a couple cameras and some lights, and off we went. It was a 2-hour conversation. He's a very charming guy, not confrontative. He's not belligerent. He's just kind of a fellow who seems very curious about everything, eager to learn. And as you say, his area naturally is in the sciences, especially this AI, artificial intelligence field. But, he's interested in everything. And I just found him very engaging fellow to talk to. And that's his style, is to kind of ask really simple, straightforward questions. And so the first one was, who is God? And we took it from there.
You spent a long part of the interview talking about evil and suffering. This seemed to be especially interesting to Lex. How did you think that part of the exchange went?
Yeah, fine. I'm kind of with William Lane Craig on the issue of the problem of suffering. Namely, it has two very different dimensions. The one is emotional, and until the eschaton, it will remain a very emotionally charged issue because all of us suffer. Some of us suffer terribly, and so how do you reconcile that fact with the existence of an all-good God? Now, at the emotional level, that's exceptionally hard to do. And in fact, any attempt to explain it is it's like an affront to our emotional perspective. So there's that side of it. On the other side, again, here I agree with Craig, there's a kind of purely intellectual side of that question. And there, the argument, in my mind, is a very weak one, because to use our suffering as a proof that there is no God rests upon an impossible premise, namely that we, with our absolutely limited intelligences, can somehow grasp that there's no justification possible for God's allowing certain evils and certain suffering. Well, just ipso facto, we can't do that. We are in zero position ever to do that. Therefore, from a purely logical standpoint, it's quite a weak argument. And to be honest about it, Brandon, we, by which I mean here the great tradition and its opponents, have rehearsed this argument over and over and over again for centuries. And I don't think we've made a lot of progress coming up with some clever new way to respond. I think the classical responses are valid from an intellectual standpoint, though they will never satisfy our emotional frustration over this issue, if that makes any sense. So that's why whenever it comes up, I'm happy to engage the argument and happy to show, here's, I think, the way we should think about it. But in a way, it's like hopeless. I mean, read the comments. Whenever you bring this issue up, someone will say, well, that's completely persuasive. And, well, I mean, how can you possibly say that, the cancer of a young kid? Yeah, I get it. I totally get it from an emotional standpoint. But intellectually, it's not a very persuasive counter argument. So I guess what I'm saying is that in a way, it's a little tiresome to me, constantly revisiting this issue of suffering, because I'm not sure there's that much more we can say about it.
I mentioned that the interview garnered lots of comments, over 4,500 comments when I just looked at it. And there's lots of positive ones, lots of people who were surprised.
Oh, yeah. The vast majority are very positive. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my take as well. But I wanted to talk about some of the negative trends. You did an article commenting on this, and I wanted to ask you more about it. Without a doubt, the most common grouping of the negative comments was that you were just tossing out word salad. They would say things like it was gobbledygook, or you were using a lot of big words to say nothing at all. What do you make of those types of criticisms?
Yeah, and a lot of that focused on the very first question he asked me, which is, who is God? And I decided to give him a fairly elevated answer, a sophisticated answer that comes out of our metaphysical tradition. And as people that followed me for years would know, I rely very much on Thomas Aquinas, that God is not a being among many. We really shouldn't call him a supreme being. He's not an item within the universe or alongside the universe, but rather God is ipsum esse, the sheer act of to be itself, in and through which all finite things, all contingent things exist. And I just sort of elaborated that idea. Now, here's what struck me, Brandon, when I read the comments, is gosh, there's an arrogance behind that. If a high theoretical physicist from, Cambridge came on and started talking in the technical language of his discipline at a very high level, and I were to say, oh, it's a bunch of word salad, what a bunch of gobbledygook, and that guy is just, well, I mean, you'd accuse me of the worst kind of stupidity and arrogance, right? Why not say, boy, that guy is using language that I don't really understand, or I don't know what the frame of reference is, and boy, I got a lot to learn about theoretical physics, and maybe I should take it, step at a time and start at a lower level, or, what I'm saying? That would be a far more reasonable perspective. But to simply jump to the conclusion that, I'm just trading in word salad, when in fact, what I was trading in was a manner of speaking that was typical of the very smartest people in the West up until the modern period. So I'm relying on a tradition as old as Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Boethius, Augustine, Aquinas, Anselm, Bonaventure, etc. And I was speaking out of that tradition in a kind of technically precise way. Okay, I think a better response would have been, I'm not quite sure what he's talking about, but maybe I could brush up on that. Maybe I could look into that a little bit. Maybe I could start at a somewhat lower level and see, what he's talking about. It was a sign to me, Brandon, of the scientism which bedevils a lot of people today. That's to say, the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge. That people in our schools just have no acquaintance with classical philosophical speech. And so it just strikes them as a bunch of nonsense. So I guess I was struck by that, and would call upon a lot of my critics there maybe to demonstrate just a touch more humility and maybe try to learn a little bit of that tradition that I was talking out of.
I think the second most common type of criticism you got for this Lex Friedman interview was that the very fact that you were Catholic disqualified you in all ways. And this, to me, was very resonant with the types of comments you got when you did the Reddit AMA. There was a lot of these types of things. So let me read you off a few examples. One, how can you listen to a representative of the most corrupt institution in history? Two, religion, especially the Catholic religion, is responsible for the death of millions. And perhaps the best one of all, number three, of all the differing variations of Christianity, Catholicism is by far the most cynical, repugnant, crass variant. It's done more harm to the human species than any other religion, and it's kept us back from progressing. What say you?
He's really fond of Catholicism, huh? Here's the first thing I'd say, Brandon, and I want to be blunt about this. How anybody after the 20th century could say that the institution that's done the most damage to the human race is the Catholic Church after Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Hitler? Are you joking? Are you serious? That you can have witnessed all of that. So these radically secularist ideologies that produced mountains of corpses, tens of millions of corpses in the 20th century, you can witness all that and still say the Catholic Church is the source of greatest corruption, has done the most damage. I mean, give me a break. So that's my first reaction. Second reaction, have Catholics in the course of 2,000 years done lots and lots and lots of bad things? Yes, of course they have. Of course they have. But it's like shooting fish in a barrel to say, hey, I can find instances of corruption and bad behavior on the part of Catholics. Well, yeah. Our very doctrine of original sin, and that original sin carries with it this kind of overtone of concupiscence, meaning a sort of perverse twisting of the will and so on, leads us to expect human corruption. So, I mean, that's not repugnant to Catholicism. We expect that people, very much including Catholics, are going to behave badly. But look, have lots and lots and lots of Americans behaved badly? Well, yeah. Over 200 and some years, I can point to myriad examples of Americans, often in the name of American values, behaving very badly indeed. Does that mean American values are bad? Does that mean American institutions are all corrupt? That speaking from an American perspective is ipso facto bad? I should never listen to anyone that advocates the American political experiment. Well, of course not. Of course not. Those values remain intact, even as lots and lots and lots of Americans have not lived up to them. So in a similar way, sure, Catholic values, Catholic principles, Catholic ideals remain intact, even as lots and lots and lots of Catholics don't live up to them. And so when I'm speaking to Lex Friedman out of the Catholic intellectual and cultural tradition, I'm not saying, hey, Lex, every single Catholic who's ever lived has just been a great person and a saint. Well, of course not. Of course not. I'm saying the great animating principles and convictions and values of Catholicism are worthwhile. And so that, to me, it's a red herring, that argument. Oh, he's saying persuasive things about God. Oh, well, remember how bad Catholics have been over the centuries. Well, yeah, I know. But I'm not going to be distracted by that observation. It's a cheap rhetorical trick.
Well, I want to ask you this question, which I'll also ask you about your Shia LaBeouf interview. But with Lex Friedman, as a Catholic evangelist, what's the biggest takeaway you had from this exchange? What lesson did you learn?
That's a good question. I say, Brandon, honestly, I don't look at me, look at Lex Friedman. I would say and again, I don't really know anything about Lex Friedman's views on religion. I really have no idea. But let's say, for sake of argument, he's someone coming out of like the more scientific world, that when someone in a world that's other than the religious world is willing to listen with respect and with curious intelligence, then great things can happen. A great conversation can unfold. Maybe we don't have to be in this stance of kind of mutual suspicion and animosity. But someone from the tech world, the science world, can ask a religious person, tell me about your thought world. That can produce a wonderful result. And I think it did in this case. I think it was a really good conversation. So I guess what I learned, I would say kudos to Lex Friedman. I think he demonstrated a very positive attitude when entering into these conversations, where, like, the new atheists sadly taught a whole generation of young people the right way to engage religious people is to refer to them as stupid and to denigrate their point of view and to mock them publicly. Well, again, kudos to Lex Friedman, who did none of those things and was willing to listen. And I think a lot of people benefited from that. So that's what I take away from it.
Well, let's turn now to talking about your exchange with Shia LaBeouf. This one has taken off in extraordinary ways. At the time of this recording, it's just about at 1 million views, 5,000 comments on YouTube. You sat down to do this interview, I believe, just a couple weeks before your transition.
A couple days even, I think.
A couple days before you went to Minnesota. At that time, did you have any idea how explosively popular that discussion would become?
Well, I would say that I did say to people, I think it'll get 1 million views. But I didn't think it would get 1 million views in 4 days or whatever it is. And I must say, I didn't expect it to be picked up by news agencies all over the world, which indeed it was. So no, I didn't see that coming. I knew it would be popular because he's, a very popular actor, especially with young people who tend to be online. So I knew it would have an impact. And that's why I wanted to do it, because I had heard a version of his story a little bit earlier. And I thought, boy, it'd be great if especially young people could hear that story. So I just asked him, I said, would you be willing to sit down, for a more formal interview? And he said, yeah, I would. So no, I knew it would have an impact, not quite the impact that it's had.
Many people, especially online, celebrated this interview as an example of what the church fundamentally exists for. Namely, the church is for sinners. The church is for broken people. It's not a clubhouse for the pious. Shia, by his own admission, is a broken man. He's been accused of a lot of horrible things. He described himself as depraved or having committed depraved acts. But when we talk about saving souls, leading people to salvation, we're not talking about abstractions, immaterial souls. We're talking about real hurt and brokenness in people's lives. Talk about that reaction. Were you happy to see that people were celebrating this as a great news, as good news? Yeah, and the overwhelming majority of people that commented, I think, saw exactly that. Yeah, I thought, Brandon, a lot of Pope Francis' line about the church as a field hospital. Where people, because I've made this point, a field hospital, that's not just a regular hospital.
that you might go to for some tests, right? A field hospital is one that's near a field of battle. It's a place where people are gravely wounded and by the culture and by all sorts of things. And I think Shia, by his own admission, was someone who's been kind of gravely wounded and it was in very bad spiritual shape. In fact, he talked frankly about suicide. I had a gun on the table, that he had hit bottom. Well, that's where the church belongs. The church belongs there. And it's a field hospital to help people who are deeply wounded. And I think what's beautiful in his story is that it functioned just that way. Because he, starts his process of preparing to play Padre Pio, but at that point, he wasn't particularly interested in, what religion would do for him. It's what he found, especially among those wonderful Capuchin friars, whom I knew very well out in California. See, to me, that's the central story that he was telling in the interview, was about the Capuchin friars who, very much in the spirit of the Lord Jesus and of St. Francis, took in this young guy who was more than a little bit lost. They had nothing to gain from him, and they weren't playing any kind of. In fact, I bet most of them didn't know who he was, but they took in this young suffering soul, and they acted as doctors and nurses in a field hospital, I think, for him, and brought him back to a very profound spiritual healing. So to me, that's a beautiful story, and I thought that's why I wanted him to tell it.
You know those Capuchin friars very well because they're in your former Santa Barbara pastoral region. You knew each of the people he was mentioning.
Yeah.
What do you think they did right in terms of evangelization?
They reached out to him in love, and they weren't judging him, and they weren't trying to indoctrinate him. They reached out in love. They included him in their life. He talked, I love this, about laughter. Long before they got to talking about St. Francis, he got there. He wanted to find out about Francis and who was this Padre Pio and tell me about their spirituality. And they got there with him. They did. But he said in the beginning, he laughed a lot with them. And they were human with him. They were welcoming and inclusive. Use all the wonderful language that our present Pope uses. They were inclusive of him and brought him into their manner of life, and that functioned as a field hospital. It healed him. And then when it was time, he began to ask questions. And then they were happy to give answers. They did. They talked a lot about Francis and a lot about Padre Pio. I know him very well. The Father James he talks about is a older Capuchin, big guy, kind of a big bear of a guy. And Shai said, he just put his hand on his shoulder, and he would just, say a couple encouraging things to him and then, move on. And just kind of a simple expression of his solidarity with him, but meant the world to him. But then eventually Father James talked to him about Padre Pio and how he should play him and all that. So they were, I thought, brilliant evangelizers. They didn't make the mistake of judging him. And may I just say, Brandon, to my fellow Catholics, it's a major problem in our faith community is we love to judge people. We love to judge people. And that move maybe makes you feel good at some perverse level, but it ain't effective evangelically. Trust me. Second danger is we can start sort of proselytizing right away. Let's get right into, having arguments and debates. Look, I love arguments and debates. That's my whole life is based on that. And we get there. We should get there. But often the opening move is that hand on a shoulder, or it's laughing, or it's, I know you're living in a van down by the river. I mean, you're living in a van out in our parking lot, but that's okay. Those are marvelous opening moves. Call them pre-evangelization.
One of the patterns in Shia's story is this transition from the ego drama to the theodrama, to use your language and Balthazar's language. In fact,
Right.
I believe at one point, Shia even says something like, he, referring to God, used my ego for his purposes.
Yeah.
Talk about that shift. Shia says, for a long time, it was all about him. He wanted to be a great actor. That was his purpose in life. But then that was finally drawn up to God's plan for his life, and that opened things up.
God uses whatever he can to accomplish his purposes. And it might be he leads us to a dead end. So he allows us to go to the pit or to the dead end of our egotism, and then we collapse. Or maybe I think in his case, it was like he wanted to get back on track. He wanted to be a famous actor again. And hey, here's a chance. Here's this juicy role of playing this Padre Pio. I'm going to do that. And so I think he saw God luring him by that sort of egotistic thing, but it brought him into the trap, as it were. It brought him into the place where, wow, now this whole world's open up to me. And so, sure. I think I used the line, didn't I, Brandon, in the interview? I forget now, but the famous Chesterton line from the Father Brown story about God will allow us to wander to the ends of the world, but then by a twitch upon the thread can bring us back, you know? And I think that's something of the Shia LaBeouf story, that he wandered, you know, quite a ways away, but God found a way to bring him back. And, you know, from the providential perspective, someone like him, the power that can have, if God finds a way to bring him back, that can bring many, many others back. And, you know, please God, our video, having gone out now to 1 million people, that's what I hoped for it, that it would be a twitch upon the thread for a lot of people.
All right, let's close with this question, which I just asked you about Lex Friedman. I'll ask you about your exchange with Shia LaBeouf. As a Catholic evangelist, what's the big takeaway? What's the big lesson learned from this discussion and how it's been received?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brandon, and it's that's worth really thinking about more deeply. I think for me the takeaway are the Capuchins, how they evangelize this young guy. That evangelization, and here I'm in the Newman spirit again, is not just intellectualism. It's not just arguments. It's not just clarifying ideas, but very often it's the drawing people into the beauty of a form of life and to let them see, hey, how these Christians love one another. Look at how these Christians live. Um, they were a hand reached out to him when he was drowning. And he used that image I thought was really good. What Christianity says, if you're drowning, is not, hey, here's a program for how to swim. It says, reach out and trust. There's a hand that wants to draw you out of these waters, and trust him. Well, see, the hand of Christ is seen in the hands of his mystical body. It was those Capuchins in California that reached out literally to him, and they were the hands of Christ, who drew him out of the waters and into a safer place. And there he was able to grow in his faith. I think that's the evangelical lesson.
Well, it's time now for our listener question. Every episode, we take a question from one of our listeners. If you have one that you'd like to ask Bishop Barron, send it in to us at the website askbishopbarron.com. Today, we hear from Patty in your home state of Illinois. She's asking about how you're able to juggle all the things that you do. Here's her question.
My name is Patty, and I'm from Illinois, and I'd like to know how you get so many things done. You have so many jobs you juggle, and I struggle with time management. Do you have any tips for that? Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. People ask me that all the time, and I don't know if I have really a good, clear answer. I guess prioritization, that when I wake up in the morning, I will tend to like prioritize. Here's what I really have to do today. I think from an administrative standpoint, you get overwhelmed with all the different things. So now that I'm the ordinary of this diocese, I mean, dozens of things are thrown at you all the time. But what's your pastoral priority? What's the one thing you really want to accomplish? And can you make the other things serve that one thing? I do set aside certain days and times if I can. It can't always work that way, but I might say, you know, Thursday this week is going to be a Word on Fire preparation day. I'm going to write articles. I'm going to write part of a book or something like that. Friday, that's a day for my meetings. Sunday, that's a day I'm going to be out and about, you know, going to parishes. Monday is going to be a day off. You know, that to kind of respect the integrity of a given day, that I'm going to do a certain amount of focused work that day. That helps me a bit. But I often think I could be a lot more productive. I feel like well, you know, but maybe I should say that. That's not a bad thing. You know, at the end of the day, I like to watch TV like the end of the day. I never watch during the day. I think that to me is always a sign of something's wrong. But the end of the day, and I can catch my brain saying, "Oh, why aren't you doing some more serious reading right now? You need to get ready for." I'll say, "Oh, calm down. This is good for me. I'm just going to watch some stupid movie or a stupid TV show or something, or a baseball game." So that's important too to get. And I also exercise every day. I make sure I get the physical, because a lot of my life is lived up from the neck up. It's ideas and talking, and it's books, and so make sure I remind myself that I have a body. I think is a good thing too. So those are a couple kind of disconnected thoughts.
Well, as we wrap up our episode today, I want to announce an exciting new book from Word on Fire that launches today, actually. It's titled With All Her Mind, A Call to the Intellectual Life. It's edited by Rachel Bullman. The feminine genius is a term coined by Pope St. John Paul II. It's become somewhat of a buzzword in the Catholic world, but has the fullness of femininity been exhausted? This book includes a collection of 17 essays written by Catholic women of diverse backgrounds and vocations. It's a call to pursue what is too often excluded from our picture of femininity, namely the intellectual life. With All Her Mind shows how the feminine genius involves both affectivity and active intellectual engagement. Features some fantastic essays, a foreword by Tracy Rowland, who is the winner of the Ratzinger Prize for Theology. This book will open up all women to follow the first and greatest commandment, to love the Lord with all her soul, with all her heart, and with all her mind. So again, it's called With All Her Mind, A Call to the Intellectual Life. I'll include a link to that new book in the show notes for this episode. Well, thanks so much for watching.